In the misty Blue Ridge Mountains, Evelyn Carter, a widowed former forest ranger, bought an abandoned village to start over. One morning, while walking her loyal dog Ranger, the silence broke. Ranger unearthed a rusted locket and a child's shoe beneath the old church bell. What began as a peaceful retreat turned into a haunting discovery that would unravel a century-old tragedy. Evelyn had no idea she was about to uncover a secret that would change Briar Hollow forever and break her heart in the process. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The road up to Pine Hollow Ridge was barely a road anymore. Just two frozen tire ruts carved through snow and pine needles, winding endlessly into the white. Evelyn Carter's old Ford pickup groaned beneath the weight of lumber, tools, and boxes of supplies. The truck's heater had died an hour ago, and her breath fogged the glass as she peered through the windshield at the mountain ahead. Her dog, Ranger, sat in the passenger seat, his golden coat flecked with frost, his brown eyes alert to every sound that filtered through the forest. Almost there. "Oh boy," she murmured, her voice raw from disuse. "Last chance to turn back." Ranger gave a low whine, as if to answer that turning back wasn't an option, not for either of them. The old sign appeared at the bend, half buried in snow. Pine Hollow Ridge, just in 1908. Someone had painted over the words, "Logging Village," long ago. The wood was blackened, scarred, like it had survived a fire. Evelyn stopped the truck and stared for a moment. The air was utterly still, the kind of silence that presses on the ears. Behind her, the world she'd known, the city, the hospital, the noise, was already a memory. Ahead of her waited the ghost of a town, and she hoped the chance to start over. She stepped out into the biting cold. Her boots crunched through the snow as she took in the view. The skeletal remains of cabins scattered across a frozen clearing, their chimneys jutting up like gravestones. The church stood at the far end, leaning slightly, its steeple still intact but warped by time. Beyond that, the mountain rose in jagged silence, its tree line whispering with every gust of wind. Ranger bounded ahead, sniffing the air, his breath rising in silver clouds. Evelyn pulled her coat tighter and started unloading supplies from the truck bed. Hammer, nails, a roll of tarps, food crates. She moved methodically. Anything to keep her hands busy, her thoughts contained. Her husband's voice echoed faintly in her memory. "When you can't breathe, build something. Doesn't matter what. Just build." He'd said that 2 years ago, right before the fire took him. Before it took everything. She carried the last box into what remained of the largest cabin. 4 standing walls, a roof patched with rusted tin, and a stone fireplace coated in ash. It smelled faintly of soot and pine. Home enough. By sunset, she had the stove lit and a pot of coffee warming. She sat on a wooden crate, her journal open across her knees. The ink bled slightly from the cold. Day 1. Arrived at Pine Hollow Ridge. It's colder than I imagined, but quieter too. I think that's what I needed. Something clean, something untouched by fire. Ranger rested his head on her lap. She stroked the scar on his paw, the one he'd gotten in the wildfire near Missoula. They were both marked by flame, survivors of something that should have killed them. Maybe that was why she trusted him more than most people. A sudden growl rumbled from Ranger's throat. His ears perked, head lifting toward the window. Evelyn froze. The firelight flickered against the frosted glass, but outside, only the darkness stared back. Wind swept through the pines, and for a heartbeat, she thought she saw a shape move between the trees. Tall, deliberate watching. Probably a deer, she whispered, though her hand slid toward the hatchet lying beside the door. Ranger didn't stop growling until several long minutes later. The next morning, the world glowed silver blue with dawn. Snow had fallen lightly through the night, layering everything in silence. Evelyn stepped outside with her coffee, watching the steam drift upward. The air was so cold it burned to breathe. The village stretched before her like a graveyard of lives once lived. Tools rusting in the snow. Children's toys half buried beside collapsed porches. Frozen laundry lines still strung between cabins. Time had simply stopped here. She walked the main path, Ranger trotting at her side. The church loomed larger up close, its door half hanging on the hinges. A cross tilted at its peak, the metal blackened by old soot. Evelyn stepped inside. Dust motes swirled in the thin morning light, slicing through the cracks. Pews lay overturned, hymnals eaten away by mice. The smell of char lingered, faint but unmistakable. Something caught her eye on the doorframe. A scrap of photo nailed there. She reached out, brushing off the frost. The picture was warped, burned along the edges. A man, a woman, and a little girl standing in front of the same church she now stood in. Their faces were half melted, but the girl's smile remained visible. Someone had pinned it here after the fire. A memorial, perhaps, or a warning, Ranger whined softly. Evelyn turned the photo over. No writing, just ash smudges. She slipped it into her jacket pocket. By noon, she had finished clearing debris from her cabin and hung an old lantern by the window. The rhythmic swing of its light gave her a strange comfort, as if it pushed the darkness back a little farther. Still, the sense of being watched never left her. The forest seemed to breathe around her, creaking, whispering, shifting. As evening settled, she stoked the fire and fed Ranger. He lay beside her chair, tail twitching even in his sleep. Evelyn opened her journal again, pen hesitating above the page. Sometimes I think fire has a soul. It devours, but it leaves something behind. Ash, yes, but also memory. Maybe that's what this place is, memory. A gust of wind rattled the window and she flinched. Ranger lifted his head, ears sharp. The lantern flickered once, twice, then steadied. Outside, the pines swayed like tall black sentinels. When she finally crawled into her sleeping bag, exhaustion dragged her down quickly. But sleep offered no peace. Flames chased her through dreams. Her husband's voice lost in the roar, her unborn child's crib collapsing in light and smoke. She woke, gasping, heart pounding, the smell of fire still in her nose. Ranger was gone from the bedside. She heard him barking wildly outside, sharp, frantic barks, digging sounds. Evelyn threw on her coat and grabbed the lantern. The wind bit at her face as she stumbled through the snow toward the sound. Ranger was behind the church, claws tearing at the frozen ground. "Ranger, what is it?" she called. He didn't stop. His paws scraped against something hard, something metallic. The lantern light glinted off it, a small chain buried in frost. Evelyn knelt beside him, brushing the snow away until her fingers found a delicate silver locket, half buried in the earth. The clasp snapped open with a soft click. Inside was a faded photograph, a man and a little girl, the same faces from the burned photo on the church door. Evelyn stared, her breath catching in the cold air. Ranger whined again, pawing at the ground beside the locket. Beneath the thin layer of snow, she saw the edge of something pale, curved. Bone. Her heart stopped. For a long moment she couldn't move. The forest was utterly still, even the wind gone. Only the whisper of snow falling filled the silence. Evelyn's voice trembled as she whispered, "Oh God, what did you find?" The lantern flickered again, and somewhere beyond the trees, something shifted. Watching, Ranger's growl deepened. The mountain, it seemed, had been waiting for her. The morning after Ranger's discovery, Pine Hollow Ridge looked almost beautiful in the early light. Every rooftop glazed in silver frost, every branch dipped in snow. But beauty on the mountain was always a mask. Beneath it lay silence, rot, and now something buried. Evelyn Carter stared at the disturbed patch of ground behind the church. The locket she'd found the night before dangled from her glove, its silver chain catching weak sunlight. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the small white curve beneath the snow. A child's skull, maybe. The thought hollowed her chest. Ranger stood near the spot, tail low, ears pricked toward the trees. He hadn't barked again, just watched, waiting. Evelyn squatted and began brushing away the snow again, slower this time. She'd spent enough years as a nurse to know what human remains looked like. The bone she uncovered wasn't animal. It was small, delicate, and unmistakably human. Her stomach tightened. "Oh, Lord." She leaned back on her heels, staring at the ground as realization sank in. Someone, maybe the little girl from the photographs, had died here, and whoever had lived in this village had left her buried behind the church. But why here? Why no marker, no grave? Her gloved hand trembled as she opened the locket again. The photo showed the same man and child she'd found nailed to the church door, but this copy was untouched by fire. Crisp, clear, unblemished. The man's expression wasn't one of joy. It was sorrowful, almost fearful. And the child, maybe 6 years old, clung to his leg. Her smile was faint, uncertain. Evelyn turned the locket over and found tiny initials scratched into the silver. C.H. 1912. She whispered the letters aloud. C.H. The sound vanished into the stillness. By mid-morning, she was pacing inside the cabin, the fire crackling in the stove. Her notebook lay open, filled with scrawled notes. Locket, C.H. Photo from early 1900s, likely pre-fire. Body buried behind church. Why unmarked? Why untouched? She rubbed her temples. The air felt heavier, colder. Every sound, the ticking stove, the wind through the boards, seemed louder, sharper. Ranger barked suddenly at the window. Evelyn's heart jumped. She crossed the room quickly and peered outside. At first she saw nothing, just the endless rows of black pines swaying under the weight of snow. Then movement, a flicker near the edge of the clearing. A figure, someone, or something, was watching from the trees. "Hey!" she shouted through the glass. "Who's there?" The figure stepped back. For a heartbeat, Evelyn caught a glimpse of a long coat, maybe brown or grey. Then it was gone. She grabbed her rifle from beside the door, a battered Winchester she'd bought from a pawn shop on her way north. Ranger was already growling low, tail stiff. Evelyn threw on her coat and pushed into the snow. "Stay close." Boy! The cold knifed through her lungs as she trudged toward the tree line. Eyes darting across the forest shadows. Nothing, just branches creaking in the wind, but then footprints. Fresh ones, deep, human-shaped, leading away from the clearing. Her pulse quickened. No tire tracks, no other signs of life for miles. Who else could be up here? She followed the prints for a few yards before they ended abruptly, as if the person had vanished mid-step. No turn, no drag, no sign of running. Ranger whined, circling the spot. His paw brushed against something half-buried, a wooden sign, its paint faded and letters carved crudely by hand. Evelyn bent and brushed off the snow, her breath hitched. Harper, the initials on the locket, C.H. Maybe Clara Harper. The pieces began to twist in her mind, forming something darker. She turned to head back toward her own cabin and froze. Smoke, thin black smoke rising from her chimney. But she hadn't lit the fire. Evelyn broke into a run, boots pounding through snow. Ranger raced beside her, barking wildly. As the cabin came into view, she saw it. The door slightly open, a curl of smoke spilling out. She gripped the rifle tighter and pushed the door wide. The fire was roaring, but not in the stove. Someone had lit a pile of old furniture in the center of the room. Flames climbed the walls, licking toward the ceiling. Heat blasted her face as she dropped the rifle and grabbed a blanket, beating the flames down with desperate force. Ranger barked and pulled at her sleeve, dragging her toward the door. Smoke stung her eyes, choking her lungs. Finally, she stumbled outside, coughing violently into the snow. It took her 10 minutes to smother the last embers. Her blankets were ruined, her supplies scorched. The air stank of burnt wood and oil. She sank to her knees beside the wreckage, trembling. Someone had been inside her cabin. Someone had tried to burn her out. She stared at the forest again, but it only stared back, silent, indifferent. Somewhere out there something was moving, something that didn't want her here. By afternoon the wind had died, leaving a heavy, suffocating stillness. Evelyn sat by the ruined hearth, her notebook open again. The page trembled beneath her pen. Harper family, possibly buried here. Child's body confirmed. Someone still on the mountain, watching, trying to scare me off. But why now? Ranger rested against her legs, eyes fixed on the door. Every creak in the wood made his ears twitch. Evelyn exhaled shakily. "I'm not leaving, you hear me?" she said aloud. Maybe to the air, maybe to herself. I didn't come all this way to run from ghosts." But even as she said it, the shadows seemed to shift again, stretching longer across the floor. She stood, went to the window, and froze. Across the clearing in the fading light, someone had placed something on the church steps. A child's toy, a small wooden horse. Carved crudely, its paint faded but intact. The snow around it was untouched, as if it had appeared there without footprints. Ranger growled low in his throat, hackles raised. Evelyn's pulse thundered in her ears. She gripped the locket in her palm so tightly it dug into her skin. The cold metal steadied her just enough to breathe. She stepped toward the door, stopped, and turned back to the notebook, writing one final line before leaving. "If I don't make it down this mountain, whoever finds this, tell them the Harpers never left Pine Hollow Ridge." Then she lifted her lantern, opened the door, and stepped into the growing dark. The snow began to fall again, covering her tracks almost immediately. Behind her, Ranger barked once, sharp and urgent, before following, and somewhere in the forest beyond the church, a woman's voice whispered her name. Soft, sad, familiar, Evelyn. The snow fell in soft, uneven curtains, each flake catching the light from Evelyn's lantern as she crossed the clearing. The air smelled faintly of smoke and pine sap, a mixture that clawed at old memories she didn't want. Her husband's charred helmet, the sound of sirens, the way heat could roar louder than thunder. Ranger padded ahead, his fur glinting in the lamplight, nose to the ground. He stopped at the church steps and growled low. The wooden horse still sat there, exactly as she'd seen from the window. Evelyn crouched, the lantern trembling slightly in her grip. The toy was carved from mountain ash, worn smooth by age. When she turned it over, she saw a word burned into the underside, almost erased by time. Sarah. Her breath caught. She'd seen that name before, in the town records, on one of the ruined grave markers behind the church. Sarah Whitaker, 1975-1982. But the locket she'd found bore the initials C.H., Clara Harper maybe, 2 children, decades apart, both connected to this place. And now someone had left this toy at her door. Ranger whined softly. Evelyn stood, heart thudding. "We're being warned," she whispered, "or lured." The forest gave no answer, only the sound of branches creaking under snow. Still she felt it, the weight of unseen eyes between the pines. She turned back toward the cabin. Then she saw it, a faint orange flicker deep in the trees, not firelight, not quite. More like a lantern swinging, weaving between trunks, too far for detail, too steady to be wind. Evelyn lifted her rifle. "Hello!" she shouted, her voice cracked through the night. "I saw you earlier. Who are you?" No reply. The light bobbed once, then began to move uphill, deeper into the forest. Ranger barked and took off after it before she could stop him. "Ranger, no!" Evelyn swore under her breath and ran after him, boots punching through the snow. The forest swallowed her quickly, her own light dimming beneath the thick canopy. The orange glow ahead slipped between trees like a ghostly will-o'-the-wisp. "Ranger!" A growl answered, sharp and close. Evelyn swung her lantern around and froze. Ranger stood by the base of a pine, pawing at a half-buried trapdoor. The light she'd seen was gone, only darkness now, and the faint smell of earth and rust. She crouched beside the dog and brushed off snow. The wooden hatch was old, its hinges red with corrosion. Letters were carved crudely across the top. Her pulse spiked. "What the hell?" The padlock was rusted through. She pried it loose with her rifle butt and lifted the hatch. Cold, damp air rushed out, carrying the smell of ash and rot. The tunnel beneath descended into the ground, its walls lined with timbers that looked ready to collapse. Evelyn hesitated. She should go back, call the sheriff. But Pine Hollow's nearest signal was 20 miles away, and Henry Cole had already dismissed her once as seeing shadows. So she lowered the lantern and climbed down. The tunnel stretched maybe 20 feet before opening into a cramped cellar. Shelves lined the walls, filled with old jars, tools, and something else. Books. Evelyn lifted one. The spine read Montana Forestry Co. 1981. Logs. Her stomach dropped. These were the company records from before the fire. Every local rumor said they'd been destroyed. She opened a logbook and flipped through brittle pages. Shipments, names, dates, then scrawled in the margins of one entry. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Thomas says they'll torch the ridge before letting the feds find out. Thomas Whitaker, Sarah's father. Evelyn's hands went cold. They burned it themselves, she whispered. Insurance? Cover up? A floorboard creaked above. She froze, lantern trembling. Another creak. Then the soft sound of breathing right overhead. Ranger's growl echoed from the tunnel. Evelyn slowly set down the book, gripping the rifle tight. The lantern's light flickered, dancing across the shelves. Dust fell from the ceiling. A single whisper reached her through the boards, "Leave the mountain." Then silence. The whisper wasn't angry. It was sorrowful, trembling, the kind of voice that carried years of regret. Evelyn swallowed hard. "Who are you?" she whispered back. No answer. She climbed the ladder quickly, but when she pushed open the hatch, the clearing was empty. The snow was undisturbed, not even footprints. The only sound was the wind moving through the pines, whispering like 1,000 unseen voices. By morning, Evelyn had gathered everything from the cellar she could carry, the logbooks, a map, and a water-stained photograph of a man she assumed was Thomas Whitaker. She'd hardly slept. Ranger lay near the fire, ears twitching at every gust of wind. When the first light hit the window, she packed the evidence into a satchel and started down the mountain toward Pine Hollow. It was time to talk to Danny Brooks. Danny's ranger station sat at the base of the trail, a squat wooden building with an American flag flapping tiredly in the cold breeze. He looked up as she burst in, snow still clinging to her coat. "Evelyn." His brows shot up. "You look like hell. What happened?" She dropped the satchel on his desk. "You didn't tell me your grandmother was part of the fire." Danny froze. "What are you talking about?" Evelyn opened the map and spread it out. "I found a cellar under the old Whitaker property. Records from the Montana Forestry Company. It proves the fire wasn't an accident." She jabbed a finger at the margin notes. "Your grandmother lived there, didn't she?" Danny's jaw tightened. "She was just a child. She barely remembers. Then why did she tell people never to rebuild?" Evelyn's voice rose, trembling between anger and fear. "Someone's still up there, Danny. They broke into my cabin, tried to burn it down." He looked shaken but not surprised. "You saw them?" "I heard them. They told me to leave." Danny exhaled slowly and leaned back. "There's something you need to see," he said finally. He opened a drawer and pulled out a faded photograph. Black and white, edges curled. It showed the same church before it burned. In front stood a group of villagers. Among them, a man in a coat holding a small girl, Sarah, and beside them, a young woman Evelyn didn't recognize, but her features were unmistakable. Martha Brooks, Danny's grandmother. "They said Thomas started the fire," Danny said quietly. "But my grandmother, she told me he was trying to stop it." "Someone else lit the torch," Evelyn frowned. "Who?" Danny hesitated, eyes flicking to the window as if afraid the trees could hear him. She called him the Watcher. Said he worked for the company. He stayed behind after the fire. He's been there ever since. Evelyn felt the back of her neck prickle. "I saw him," she whispered. Danny looked at her sharply. "Then you need to stay away from that mountain." She shook her head. "I can't. Whatever happened, that child deserves to be named." Danny's eyes softened. "Then at least let me come with you." Evelyn hesitated, then nodded. Outside, the sky had turned the color of ash. Snow began to fall again, heavier this time. As they left the station, Ranger trotting beside them, Evelyn glanced back up the trail. The pines loomed like dark sentinels in the storm. Somewhere up there, someone or something was waiting, and she was going back. The drive up the mountain was silent, except for the steady crunch of snow under Danny's truck tires. The sky was a pale bruise, swollen clouds promising another storm. Evelyn sat in the passenger seat, the satchel of evidence between her boots. Ranger rested his head on her knee, eyes half-lidded but alert, as if he too could feel the tension thickening in the cab. Danny kept glancing at the rearview mirror. "You sure you want to go back tonight?" he asked. "Weather's turning ugly." Evelyn didn't answer immediately. The mountainside loomed ahead, dark, endless. "If I wait, he might come back," she finally said. "Whoever's been watching, they don't want the truth out." Danny exhaled through his nose. "You think it's the same guy my grandmother talked about? The Watcher?" She turned toward him. "You don't?" He gripped the wheel tighter. "I think grief and isolation can make people see ghosts. Pine Hollow's got a lot of both." Evelyn stared out the window. "You didn't see the toy horse or hear the voice?" "No," Danny said quietly. "But I saw what fire does to a mind. My grandmother still wakes up screaming some nights." That silenced them both. The truck climbed the final bend, wheels slipping on patches of ice until the outline of the village came into view. Skeletal cabins crouched beneath snow. The church cross snapped in half. Evelyn leaned forward. "Stop the truck." She pointed toward the edge of the clearing. A light was flickering near her cabin. Danny frowned. "Is that your lantern?" "It was," she said grimly, "until I took it with me." They approached on foot, Ranger padding ahead through the drifts. The cabin door stood half open again, its hinges groaning in the wind. Evelyn lifted her rifle while Danny drew a flashlight. "Anyone here?" Danny called. No response, only the whisper of snow against the roof. They stepped inside. The air was cold, too cold. The fire had long gone out, but the smell of smoke lingered. Something metallic glinted near the stove. Evelyn knelt. A child's shoe. Burned around the edges, her hands shook as she picked it up. "Sarah," she murmured. Danny moved toward the table. The notebook Evelyn had left open was gone. In its place, a single sheet of paper lay neatly folded. He opened it. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. The same slanted letters from Sarah's diary pages. "You found her bones." "Don't wake the others." Danny's voice was barely a whisper. "What the hell?" Evelyn backed toward the window, staring into the tree line. The forest seemed thicker than before, pressing closer. The pines swayed, whispering in the wind, but the sound wasn't random. It almost formed words. "Leave," she swallowed hard. "We're not alone." Ranger growled low, tail stiff, ears pricked toward the back door. Evelyn turned and caught movement outside. A figure, tall and hunched, crossing between cabins. Danny's flashlight beam darted toward it, but the figure vanished into the dark. "Ranger, stay!" Evelyn shouted, but the dog bolted through the open door, barking furiously. "Damn it!" Danny ran after him, slipping on the ice. Evelyn followed, rifle raised, the cold biting her lungs. The barking echoed through the trees. Then silence. "Ranger!" They sprinted toward the sound, boots crunching through the snow, until the beam of Danny's flashlight caught movement ahead. Ranger stood near the old sawmill, growling at a collapsed shed. The door hung crookedly on one hinge. Faint light glowed from inside. A candle, maybe. Evelyn moved forward first. She pushed the door open, rifle ready. Inside, the walls were lined with old tools, and in the center of the room sat a small shrine, wood and ash piled into the shape of a cross. Around it were burned photographs, melted toys, and a scattering of bones. She froze. "Dear God." Danny stepped beside her, staring in horror. It's like someone built a memorial." Evelyn's eyes darted across the room. There were names scratched into the walls, some half-burned, others carved deep enough to bleed the wood. Sarah, Thomas, Clara, Henry, Martha. Her throat tightened. "Martha?" Danny looked closer. "That's my grandmother's name, but she's still alive." He turned toward her slowly. "You don't think—" A noise cut him off, a deep, ragged inhale from the shadows. Evelyn spun, rifle raised. "Who's there?" The candle flickered. A shape moved at the back of the shed, human but barely. Thin, gaunt, wrapped in layers of ragged coats. The figure stepped forward. And Evelyn saw the face, grey skin, hollow cheeks, eyes that gleamed like wet stone. "You shouldn't have come back," the figure rasped. Danny aimed the flashlight, his voice tight. "Who are you?" The man's lips curled into something like a smile. "I kept them safe. I buried the ones the fire forgot." Evelyn's heart pounded. "You're the Watcher." The man tilted his head. "Names don't matter. Only sins." Danny stepped forward, hand hovering near his holster. "Did you kill that child?" The Watcher's eyes flicked to him. "Kill no, she burned like the rest. The fire took them, but someone had to stay." He jabbed a filthy finger toward Evelyn. "And now you stir their ashes again." Ranger barked, teeth bared. The Watcher flinched but didn't move away. "You brought the fire with you," he whispered. "I can smell it on your soul." Evelyn froze. "What did you say? You think the flames ended with your house? You think you escaped them?" He laughed softly, a sound that curdled the air. "You didn't come here by chance. The mountain called you because you owe it a debt." Her fingers trembled around the rifle. "You don't know anything about me." The Watcher's gaze softened, almost pitying. "Don't I?" The candle went out. Darkness swallowed them. Evelyn fumbled with the lantern, heart hammering. Danny's voice came sharp through the dark. "Stay back." Something moved. A rush of air, a scuffle, a crash of metal. Evelyn fired blindly. The rifle's muzzle flashed, lighting the shed in stuttering bursts. The Watcher lunged, shoving past them, and vanished through the open doorway into the storm. "Danny!" "I'm fine," he shouted. "He's heading for the ridge." They gave chase, snow whipping into their faces. The Watcher moved fast despite his age, weaving between trees like something feral. Ranger tore after him, barking furiously. When they reached the ridge, the moon broke through the clouds for an instant, and Evelyn saw him standing at the edge of a cliff. Silhouetted against the storm. "Stop!" Danny shouted, raising his gun. The Watcher turned, eyes glinting. "You can't stop what's already burning." Then he stepped backward and disappeared over the edge. Evelyn ran forward, peering down. The slope was sheer, jagged rocks and drifting snow below. "No sign of a body." Danny lowered his weapon slowly. "Jesus." Evelyn's breath fogged the air. "He knew my husband died in a fire," she whispered. "How could he know that?" Danny shook his head. "He's been up here for decades. Maybe he knows more than any of us want to." They stood there in silence as the wind howled through the pines. Finally, Evelyn turned toward the village. "We're not done. He said he buried the ones the fire forgot. That means there's more." Danny glanced at her, then at Ranger, who was pawing anxiously at the snow near the tree line. More graves. Evelyn's eyes hardened. More truths. The storm came without warning. By mid-afternoon, the sky over the Montana ridges had turned the color of gunmetal. The air crackled with static, and the pines bowed under the weight of fresh snow. Evelyn Carter stood on the porch of her cabin, arms wrapped around herself, staring at the ghost of the old church down the slope. The roof was half buried, the cross at its peak jutting like a broken tooth through the whiteness. Ranger barked twice from the yard, his fur bristling. He was staring at the woods again. Evelyn followed his gaze. A shadow flitted between the trees, too quick to name. She blinked, and it was gone. "Come inside," she murmured, her breath fogging. "It's just the wind." Inside, the generator's hum faltered, then steadied again. The lamps flickered. She tossed another log into the stove and crouched beside it, rubbing her hands near the flames. The storm howled outside like a wounded animal. A figure stepped out of the darkness. He wore a long coat, patched with animal hide, a scarf hiding most of his face. His hair was grey, his beard tangled, eyes pale as frost. He held a makeshift spear of sharpened rebar. "You shouldn't have come here, Mrs. Carter," he rasped. Evelyn's grip tightened on the lantern. "Who are you?" He took a step closer. The light caught something hanging from his neck, a child's locket. The same one Ranger had dug up behind the church. "My name doesn't matter," he said. "But you know it, don't you?" "Thomas Whitaker." She breathed. A bitter smile cracked his face. "My father. I'm Nathan. What's left of him, what's left of me, it's all the same now." Her throat went dry. "You've been living here?" "All this time," he nodded slowly. "Someone had to guard them. The ones the fire took. The ones they left behind. Your father, he started the fire." Nathan's eyes glinted. He tried to stop it. But greed burns hotter than any match. The company wanted more. The men wanted silence. So they fed the fire with their lies. "My sister, Sarah." His voice broke. "They left her in the church." Evelyn's chest ached. "I found her diary." "I know." His voice hardened. "You've been reading our graves. I just want the truth." "The truth won't save you," he said, stepping closer. "It never saved us." The tunnel groaned. Snow shifted above them. A chunk of rock crashed down, narrowly missing her. Smoke began to seep from a pile of timbers. Her lantern's heat had caught dry wood. Evelyn coughed. "We have to get out." Nathan didn't move. "You don't belong here. The mountain doesn't forgive." When she tried to push past him, he grabbed her arm. She swung the lantern up and smashed it against his shoulder. Flame and glass burst outward. He shouted, stumbling back as his coat caught fire. Evelyn lunged for the exit, half blind with smoke. "Nathan!" she yelled. "Come with me." But his voice came from behind the fire. "You can't save what's already dead." The tunnel roared as the support beams gave way. Evelyn crawled through a side passage, rocks and smoke raining down. She felt heat lick her boots, the taste of ash choking her. Then cold, blinding cold, as she burst out into the snow, coughing, gasping. Ranger was there instantly, pressing against her, whining. She clutched his fur, looking back. The ground shuddered. The mine entrance collapsed in a muffled roar, sending a wave of snow and dust into the air. Then silence. She sank to her knees. "He's gone," she whispered. "God help him, he's gone." By dawn, the storm had passed. Evelyn sat at her table, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the burned ledger and Sarah's diary. Her hands shook as she turned the pages. She saw patterns now. Not just crimes of greed, but echoes of her own life. A fire had taken everything from her, too. Her husband, her child, her home. She'd come here thinking she could rebuild among ruins, but the mountain had simply shown her another reflection of her pain. She traced the child's handwriting on the diary's last page. "Daddy said fire cleans what the law won't." Maybe Sarah was right. Maybe fire destroyed lies as well as lives. The radio hissed again. Evelyn froze. Through the static came a voice. Danny's voice. Distorted, almost mechanical. "Evelyn, you shouldn't have gone down there," her heart hammered. "Danny? Are you on the line?" Static. Then, "He's not gone." The transmission cut. Ranger lifted his head, ears sharp. He growled low, staring at the door. Outside, the wind had died completely. The world was still. But under the quiet, Evelyn could hear it, the crunch of footsteps in the snow, slow and deliberate, circling the cabin. She rose, the rifle trembling in her hands, and stepped toward the window. The tracks led from the tree line to her porch and stopped just beneath the light. Something brushed against the door. A whisper, half human, half the sigh of wind through charred wood. "Fire cleans what the law won't." The lantern beside her flickered. Ranger growled, his teeth bared. Evelyn took a deep breath, heart hammering, and whispered, "Come if you're real." But the door never opened. The footsteps retreated into the dark. Evelyn stood there for a long time. The rifle still raised, the snow outside glowing faintly blue under the rising moon. That night, she dreamed of two fires, one devouring her old home, the other the mountain village. Both burned the same shade of gold. In the dream, she saw Sarah's face through the smoke, eyes calm, almost forgiving. When she woke, dawn had touched the mountains in pale light. The storm was gone, but the world felt newly fragile, as if a single spark could shatter it again. Evelyn looked at the diary, at the ledger, at her reflection in the frosted window. The truth was no longer buried, but it was alive, dangerous, moving toward her. She whispered, "It's not over." Ranger's ears twitched. Outside, the snow whispered too, faintly, like voices beneath the ice. And from far down the slope near the church ruins, smoke began to rise again. The morning mist clung to the ridges like a shroud, wrapping the ruined village in grey silence. Mara awoke to the low hum of wind through the eaves of her cabin, the smell of damp pine, and the faint rattle of Buddy's paws as he paced by the door. The dog had not slept much since the discovery. The bone he'd unearthed, and the child's shoe half buried beside it. Every night since, Buddy's growls echoed softly in the dark, his eyes trained on the path leading down to the old well. Mara pushed herself out of bed, her mind heavy. The sheriff had been up 2 days ago. They'd cordoned off the area and taken the remains away. Human, they'd confirmed. Small bones, likely decades old. No name, no context, just the grim echo of something that had happened long before Mara ever laid claim to these hills. But she couldn't stop thinking about it. She wrapped her jacket tight and stepped outside. The air was sharp, the cold cutting through the remnants of dawn. The mist parted as Buddy bounded ahead, stopping at the path near the well, the place where the scent still lingered strongest. Mara stopped beside him. The sheriff's yellow tape fluttered limply, half torn by wind and rain. "Not your fault, boy," she said softly, resting her hand on his head. "You just found what everyone else forgot." The truth was, everyone had forgotten this place. The village had been left to rot, its name erased from county maps. Locals spoke of Hollow Ridge only in murmurs, stories about fires, missing folks, and something they called the winter that ate the mountain. But there was no record. No names, nothing official, only the ghosts in the soil. That afternoon, Mara drove down to the town library. The building was small, 2 stories with the smell of mildew and dust in every page. She went straight to the historical archives, a row of old ledgers and microfilm reels labeled with fading county names. The librarian, a grey-haired man named Samuel Hines, gave her a wary smile. "Back again, Miss Rowan?" Mara nodded. "You still have that box of old county records? The ones you said were too damaged to scan?" Hines frowned, pushing his glasses up his nose. "You mean the disaster files?" "Yeah, they're in the back, but most of it's illegible." "Why the sudden interest?" She hesitated. "Someone might have died up there, a long time ago. I just want to know what happened." The old man studied her for a moment, then nodded. "That mountain's seen more than its share of sorrow. Don't dig too deep unless you're ready for what you'll find." Mara almost smiled. "That's the thing about digging, Mr. Hines. Sometimes it finds you first." He motioned for her to follow, leading her to a dusty back room filled with boxes. She began sorting through brittle papers, old census sheets, handwritten deeds, faded photographs. And then, near the bottom of one box, she found it, a folded, water-stained newspaper. The Hollow Ridge Chronicle, October 1978. The headline, "Family Vanishes After Blizzard, Village Declared Unsafe." The article mentioned the Rowe family, George, Anna, and their 7-year-old daughter Claire. No bodies recovered. The village was abandoned the following spring due to unstable ground and repeated rock slides. Mara's hands trembled as she read. The names were faded, but clear enough. Rowe. It was close enough to Rowan that she felt a chill crawl down her spine. That night, she sat by the fire, the paper spread out across her table. The flames reflected in Buddy's eyes as he lay curled near the hearth, his ears twitching at every pop of burning wood. "Claire Rowe," Mara whispered. The name hung in the cabin like a ghost. 7 years old. She closed her eyes. For a moment she could almost see the child. Small, bundled in a worn coat, boots too big for her feet, clutching her mother's hand as snow swallowed the path. "What happened to you?" she murmured. The wind rose outside, rattling the loose window pane. Buddy lifted his head and gave a low growl. Mara followed his gaze toward the door. Then came the sound, a slow, rhythmic tapping, 3 knocks, soft, deliberate. Her heart thudded. She grabbed the lantern and moved to the door, every step echoing. She hesitated, then opened it. Nothing, just the mist curling in the pale moonlight. Buddy whined, ears flat. His gaze darted to the tree line, the same spot where the sheriff had dug, and there, faint as breath, she saw a small shape. A girl. Standing among the trees, Mara's breath caught. The child's outline was almost translucent, her hair tangled, her dress pale as frost. She turned and vanished into the fog. "Claire," Mara whispered, the name slipping out before she could stop herself. Over the next few days, Mara tried to rationalize it. Fatigue, stress. Maybe the mist playing tricks on her eyes. But the signs didn't stop. Footprints outside the cabin, small, bare, leading toward the woods. The faint sound of a child's laughter echoing near the well. And one morning, she found the old newspaper clipping placed neatly on her nightstand, though she'd left it downstairs. Mara began to dream of the blizzard, the howling wind, the snow piling high against boarded windows, and the sound of someone crying beneath the floorboards. Every time she woke, Buddy would be staring at the door, growling. She finally drove down to speak with Sheriff Porter again. He was a tall man with a lined face and kind eyes, the sort of person who carried other people's tragedies like they were his own. "Sheriff, I found records. A family called the Rose. They vanished from that village in '78. Porter frowned. "We saw that name on some old maps. You think the remains could be theirs? I think it's the little girl, Claire, and I think—" She hesitated. "I think she's still there." The sheriff gave her a look, not mocking but cautious. "You mean in spirit?" Mara nodded slowly. "She's trying to tell me something. The night before last I saw her near the trees." Porter raised a hand gently. "Miss Rowan, I believe you saw something, but maybe it's grief. Isolation does strange things in those mountains. You're alone up there, surrounded by silence. It makes the past louder." Mara clenched her fists. "Then come see for yourself." That evening, Porter drove up with 2 deputies. They swept the area near the well, finding nothing. No new footprints, no disturbances. The sheriff gave her a sad look before they left. But later that night, after the headlights faded and darkness returned, Buddy began barking, frantic, wild. Mara grabbed her flashlight and followed him into the woods. The wind howled through the pines, and branches cracked under her boots. "Buddy," she shouted. "Come back!" The beam of her flashlight danced through the mist, and then froze. There, half covered by leaves and dirt, was a cellar door, old rusted, hidden by years of decay. Buddy pawed at it, whining. Mara's pulse thundered. She knelt, pulled hard, and the latch gave way with a shriek of metal. A wave of stale air rose from below, cold, damp and faintly sweet, like rot and forgotten time. She shone the light downward. Wooden steps, crumbling walls, and at the bottom, something glinting in the beam. She descended slowly. Her boots hit the dirt floor, and her breath came in short gasps. The glint resolved into a locket, small, heart-shaped, silver dulled by age. Mara picked it up and opened it. Inside was a faded photo, a man, a woman, and a little girl, Claire Rowe. The ground shifted beneath her. She looked down and saw the outline of another small handprint pressed into the earth. Then came a whisper, faint as snow falling. Cold. So cold! Mara spun, but the cellar was empty. Her flashlight flickered. Once, twice, and then went out. In the dark she heard a small sob, then silence. When she emerged, dawn was breaking. She held the locket tight against her chest. Buddy pressed close to her, trembling. Back at the cabin, she placed the locket on the table beside the newspaper. It wasn't over. The girl's spirit wasn't at rest, not yet. There was something else buried beneath Hollow Ridge, something the Rose had hidden, or someone had hidden from them. Mara took a long breath, her voice barely a whisper. "Claire, I'll find the truth." "I promise," Buddy whined softly, resting his head against her knee. Outside, the mist began to lift. For the first time, Mara could see the outline of the village clearly, the remnants of its homes, its roads, and the faint shape of a cross on a distant hill, a forgotten graveyard, her next destination. The storm had passed, leaving Hollow Creek wrapped in silver fog. The air smelled of pine and wet stone, and every branch dripped quietly in the still morning light. Sarah trudged up the muddy path toward the old chapel she had seen on her walks before, its crooked steeple barely visible through the mist. Hunter padded beside her, tail low, ears twitching. She didn't know why she came here that morning. Maybe it was the dream of voices calling through the wind, of a child's laughter echoing through the empty streets. Or maybe it was just that growing pull she felt since she'd found the village. The feeling that something in Hollow Creek wanted to be remembered, The chapel stood half sunken into the earth, its wooden doors long rotted away. Wild vines crept through the broken stained glass, their tendrils wrapping around the altar like nature reclaiming faith. Sarah stepped inside carefully, the floor groaning beneath her boots. Hunter stopped at the doorway, growling low. "Hey," she whispered, crouching to calm him. "It's all right," but Hunter's eyes stayed fixed on the altar. Sarah followed his gaze and froze. A row of small wooden crosses lay there, hand-carved and child-sized. Time had smoothed their edges, but faint names were still burned into the wood. Most had faded, but one stood out, Grace. Her breath caught. She remembered the journal she'd found weeks ago. Hidden in one of the abandoned houses, a mother's entries about her daughter Grace, who had fallen ill after the mine flooded. Sarah had thought it was just grief. Now it felt like something else entirely. Hunter barked once, sharp and insistent, then trotted behind the chapel, nose to the ground. Sarah followed him, heart pounding. Behind the ruined walls, half buried under roots and stone, she found a small graveyard. Dozens of unmarked mounds stretched into the trees, and at the center, a larger grave, its headstone cracked but still standing. "Here rests the souls the mountain could not keep." The words carved deep into the stone sent a chill through her spine. She knelt, tracing the letters with her gloved hand, feeling the weight of forgotten sorrow pressing down on the quiet land. "This place," she whispered, voice trembling. "It's full of ghosts." Hunter whimpered softly and pressed his head against her arm. Sarah looked out at the fog-covered hills and felt something shift inside her. For the first time, Hollow Creek didn't feel empty. It felt watched, not by anything sinister, but by memories waiting for someone to listen. When she finally stood, the fog began to lift, and sunlight spilled across the graves like a quiet blessing. Sarah turned toward the path back home, one thought anchoring her heart. The dead weren't gone here. They were waiting to be found, and she wasn't leaving until she understood what had happened to Grace, and to everyone who had once called this broken mountain home. The fog thinned by noon, and the mountain exhaled a quiet stillness. Sarah descended from the chapel, her boots sliding against the damp earth as she replayed the sight of the graveyard in her mind. The rows of unmarked mounds haunted her more than she expected. Each one was a question, a silence too long kept. Hunter stayed close to her side, glancing back every few steps as though expecting the forest itself to move. The dog's unease was contagious. Sarah's heart beat faster with each groan of a shifting pine. Somewhere in the valley a crow called, harsh and lonely. At the edge of the old mill site she stopped. She could still see faint traces of the fire that had ended everything decades ago. Blackened stones, warped metal, the skeletal remains of the logging crane. And near it, buried under moss and ash, something caught her eye, a piece of charred wood. Carved with the same marking she'd seen on the chapel cross, a small G. Sarah crouched and brushed away the dirt. Beneath the blackened plank was a rusted latch. Her pulse quickened. She dug with her hands until the latch gave way to reveal a small wooden trapdoor, almost invisible under the years of debris. "Hunter, stay," she murmured. The dog whined but obeyed as Sarah pried open the hatch. Cold air spilled up from the dark. A narrow ladder led down into what looked like a storage cellar, or perhaps something worse. She clicked on her flashlight and began her descent, her breath fogging in the chill. The beam swept over what remained below. Broken crates, rusted saw blades, old tools. But what made her freeze were the walls, covered with names scratched into the wood. Dozens of them, some faint, some desperate. Thomas Whitaker, Grace, Clara, Joseph. The last one made her chest tighten. Martha Brooks. She stepped back, remembering the name from one of the photographs she'd found in the old post office. Martha, a young woman then smiling beside a group of workers. Sarah's grip tightened on the flashlight. "You're the Watcher!" He gave a small, bitter laugh. "That's what they call me now. But once I had a name." She took a step closer. "Who are you?" The man hesitated, then exhaled shakily. "Daniel Whitaker, Sarah's uncle." Sarah's breath caught. The pieces clicked in her mind. The surname, the age, the familiarity of his features in the old photos. "You survived the fire," he nodded slowly. "Barely. I was a boy. My father, Thomas, told me to hide in the cellar. Said he'd fix everything. But the fire spread faster than he thought. He didn't come back." His voice broke, rough with memory. "When I climbed out, the village was gone. My sister, my niece, all of them." Sarah's throat tightened. "You stayed here all these years?" Daniel looked toward the cracked window, moonlight catching his hollow eyes. "Somebody had to. Someone had to guard the truth. The company sent men back later, tried to dig up the evidence, destroy what was left. But I found the papers first. I saw what they did. What did they do?" He turned to her, voice trembling but fierce. "The company found a new mineral vein beneath the mountain, worth millions. But the workers were already sick from the chemicals they used to dig. They were going to strike, so the bosses decided to burn the place down, blame it on faulty equipment, and collect the insurance. My father helped them cover it up. He thought it would save the rest of us. But when the fire took Sarah, he broke." Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. "And you stayed. To keep people away." Daniel nodded. "To make sure no one else got hurt chasing ghosts." He looked at her sharply. "But you dug it all up again." "Why?" She swallowed hard. "Because the truth deserves to be known. They can't stay ghosts forever." His jaw tightened. "You think truth will set you free?" "It won't. It only burns you twice." The chapel trembled as a gust of wind rattled the doors. For a moment, Sarah thought he might attack her, but instead, he slumped against a pew, shoulders sagging. "I tried to warn the sheriff once," he muttered. "They called me crazy. So I stayed. I built the crosses, buried what I could, scared off the ones who came to take more." Sarah approached slowly, heart pounding. "You don't have to keep hiding. Come with me. Tell your story." He looked at her, truly looked, and something in his expression softened. But then he shook his head. "I can't leave. The fire's still burning in me. I can smell it every night. And now it's found you too." Before she could answer, Hunter growled low. Sarah turned. Headlights flickered outside the chapel. A truck door slammed. "Danny?" she whispered. Daniel's eyes narrowed. "Who?" Sheriff Cole's voice echoed from outside. "Sarah, you in there?" Sarah's heart leapt, relief and dread all at once. "Yes, I found him." But Daniel's expression twisted. "You brought them here." He snatched up a lantern from the floor, backing away. "They'll bury it again. They always do." "Daniel, no." He threw the lantern against the altar. Flames burst across the wood, hungry and bright. The old chapel, dry as bone, caught instantly. Smoke filled the air. Hunter barked, snapping at the man's coat. Sarah lunged forward, trying to pull Daniel away, but he shoved her back, eyes wild. "Leave," he shouted. "Let it die this time." The doors burst open. Sheriff Cole and Danny rushed in. Danny froze at the sight of the burning chapel and the old man at its center. "Grandma was right," Danny breathed. "You're the one." Daniel turned, seeing him. His eyes softened for the first time. "You look like your grandmother," the roof groaned. Flames licked higher, devouring the pews. "Go!" Sarah yelled, coughing through the smoke. Danny grabbed her arm, dragging her toward the exit as Hunter bounded ahead. Behind them, Daniel stood by the altar, fire curling around him. For a moment, Sarah saw a strange peace on his face, the expression of a man finally letting go. As they stumbled out into the night, the chapel collapsed behind them, sending a wave of sparks into the dark. The mountain went silent again, save for the crackle of fire dying in the distance. Danny held Sarah as she caught her breath. "Is he?" Sarah shook her head, tears cutting through the soot on her face. "He chose to stay." They both turned toward the burning ruin, watching it sink into ashes. The truth had finally surfaced, and taken one last soul with it. In the faint glow, Sarah reached down to Hunter, running her fingers over his fur. "It's over," she whispered. It has to be, but deep in her chest she knew the mountain would remember, and so would she. The morning after the fire, a soft drizzle rolled over the mountain, thin, grey, and endless. Smoke curled faintly from the ashes of the chapel, rising like ghosts into the mist. The once silent valley now carried the hum of engines and voices. Sheriff Cole's men had arrived before dawn, setting up tape, taking photographs, and combing through the wreckage. Sarah stood a few yards away, wrapped in a blanket someone had given her. Her hands still smelled faintly of smoke and ash. Hunter sat beside her, quiet and still, eyes fixed on the ruins, as if waiting for something to move. Danny approached from behind, his expression hollow. "They found him," he said quietly. "What's left of him?" Sarah closed her eyes. "Daniel Whitaker," he nodded. "They'll confirm through dental records, but it's him." The sheriff said the coroner found something beside him, though. He held out a small metal locket, the same one Ranger had unearthed days ago, now burned, but intact. Sarah took it with trembling fingers. The hinges creaked as she opened it. Inside was a faded photograph, a little girl with dark hair and bright eyes, Sarah Whitaker, and her father Thomas smiling faintly behind her. The picture was cracked down the center, dividing them like the fire that had separated their lives. Danny crouched beside her. "You were right, you know, about the company. Cole found the old files buried in the office cellar. They'll reopen the investigation." Sarah didn't answer at first. She just stared at the photo, her reflection faintly visible in the glass over the child's face. "All these years," she murmured. "He stayed here alone, just to protect the truth. To make sure no one else got hurt." Danny sighed, looking toward the burned chapel. "My grandmother always said the mountain had a heartbeat, that it keeps the memories of those who died here. Maybe he was part of that." The drizzle thickened into rain. It pattered softly on the ruins, hissing against the dying embers. Sheriff Cole approached, his face lined with fatigue. "Miss Carter, we'll need your statement one more time before we wrap up for the day." Sarah nodded faintly. "Of course." Cole paused before walking off again. "You did something good here. Might not feel like it yet, but some stories deserve to end in daylight." When he left, Sarah looked around the village one last time. The blackened beams, the ghost outlines of cabins, the way the fog swallowed the treetops. She had come here to rebuild her life, to escape fire, not walk back into it. And yet, in some twisted way, the mountain had given her what she needed most, closure. She rose to her feet. "Come on, Hunter." The dog trotted beside her as she walked down the muddy trail toward her cabin. The rain washed over the path, softening the footprints that led back to the chapel, erasing the final traces of the night before. Inside, the cabin smelled of damp pine and old smoke. Sarah set the locket on the table beside the burned photograph she'd saved. Two ghosts, side by side, one who'd been lost to fire and one who'd been saved by it. Danny lingered in the doorway. "You sure you're staying?" Sarah smiled faintly. "For a while. Someone has to finish what I started, rebuild the village, make it livable again. Not as a monument to tragedy, but as something new." He nodded, admiration flickering behind the exhaustion in his eyes. "You're braver than I'd be, maybe," she said softly. "Or maybe I just learned what fire can't take from you." Hunter barked once, tail wagging weakly. Danny gave a small smile. "If you need help, you know where to find me." When he left, Sarah sat by the window watching the fog roll through the trees. The rain had already begun to fade, replaced by shafts of pale sunlight cutting through the clouds. She felt for the first time in years a strange peace settle over her chest. The mountain was quiet again, but not empty. She picked up her journal and began to write, not a diary like the one she'd found, but something new, the story of a burned village, a grieving woman, and the truth that refused to stay buried. Outside, the wind moved softly through the trees. For a moment, she thought she heard a child's laughter, faint, distant, like an echo carried on the rain. Sarah looked up, smiling through her tears. "Rest now," she whispered. "You're home." Hunter lifted his head and let out a small whine, as if agreeing, and for the first time since she'd arrived on the mountain, Evelyn Carter felt something she hadn't in years. Not fear, not grief, but belonging. The fire had taken much, but it had also revealed what was left behind. Ashes, truth, and a reason to start again. The sun slipped behind the Blue Ridge peaks as Evelyn stood beside the rebuilt church, Ranger resting quietly at her feet. The once abandoned village now whispered with life, flowers growing where graves had been, laughter echoing faintly through repaired walls. She looked toward the spot where Ranger had first dug and whispered, "We brought them home." A soft wind carried the church bell's faint chime through the valley. For the first time in years, Briar Hollow wasn't haunted. It was finally at peace. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot. 2 months ago, the quiet of these mountains had felt like salvation. Now the silence between gusts of wind felt watchful, listening. The radio on the table hissed, static. Then, faintly, a voice threaded through the noise. A woman's voice, whispering something she couldn't quite catch. Evelyn leaned closer. "He's still here." The voice cut out. Only the hum of the generator remained. Evelyn switched the dial, but the frequency was empty. She sat frozen, the hairs on her neck standing up. "Interference," she said aloud, though her throat was tight. "Just interference." Ranger pressed against her knee, growling softly. By the second day, the storm had buried the roads. The world outside was a pale void. Evelyn tried reading Sarah's diary again, but the words swam. She'd stopped sleeping properly. Every creak of the cabin made her startle. Late that afternoon, a knock came at the door. Ranger's bark split the air. Evelyn grabbed her rifle and moved to the window. Through the snow, a figure trudged toward her, broad-shouldered face wrapped in a scarf. Danny Brooks. She opened the door just enough to let him in. He stomped the snow off his boots and pulled down his scarf, his face red from the cold. "You weren't kidding about isolation," he said, trying for a smile. "Half the road's a snowbank." Evelyn poured him coffee. "You shouldn't have come up. Couldn't reach you on the radio." He looked around, eyes scanning the room, the stacked firewood, the scattered maps, Sarah's diary lying open. "You've been busy," she hesitated. "You heard about the locket?" "The bones." Sheriff Cole's looking into it, but... "Evelyn, these mountains have a history of strange finds. The fire displaced a lot of people, sometimes remained surface years later." She studied him. "And the company records he mentioned?" "The ones that burned?" Danny's jaw tightened. "My family's name is in those files. Doesn't mean we're guilty of anything. You're saying it's coincidence?" "I'm saying—" He stopped, his voice rough. "You don't understand what that place does to people who go digging for ghosts." Evelyn's patience snapped. "Your grandmother lived here, didn't she?" "Martha Brooks. She was one of the survivors." He froze. For a heartbeat, the wind filled the silence. "Yes," he said finally. "She was here. She doesn't talk about it. She remembers something," Evelyn said quietly. "And she's not the only one." Sarah Whitaker wrote what she saw. "Someone started that fire, Danny, and it wasn't nature." His gaze flickered toward the window. "Some things are better left buried." Ranger's growl cut through the air again. Both of them turned. A shape stood at the tree line, tall, still, watching. Evelyn grabbed her rifle. "Do you see that?" Danny moved to the door, peering out. The figure stepped back, swallowed by the white. When they reached the spot moments later, there was nothing, just boot prints that led a few yards into the woods before vanishing. "Tracks end here," Danny muttered, crouching. "Like he just disappeared," Ranger whined, pawing at the snow. Evelyn scanned the trees. The silence pressed on her chest. "Maybe he didn't disappear," she said softly. "Maybe he's been here all along." That night, unable to shake the image of the vanishing prince, Evelyn sat by lamplight with Sarah's diary. The final pages were warped by water, the pencil strokes erratic. "The men came back today. Daddy said they want to open the mill again. He told them no, that the land was federal now. They said bad things might happen if he didn't help." Mommy cried. "I heard shouting outside. Then it got quiet. Daddy said fire cleans what the law won't." Evelyn stared at the words until they blurred. She could almost hear Sarah's voice, trembling, small, describing something no child should have witnessed. She turned to the next page. It was half-burned. Only fragments remained. They came at night. The lights in the trees, Daddy said. Then nothing. Ranger's head lifted suddenly, ears pricked. He began barking at the door. Evelyn's pulse jumped. She grabbed her flashlight, stepped outside. The snow had eased, the moon breaking through the clouds in faint silver. Ranger bounded ahead toward the ridge behind the church. "Ranger, wait!" He barked once, then stopped, tail stiff. Evelyn followed, crunching through knee-deep snow until she saw it. The entrance to an old mine shaft she'd never noticed before. The opening was half collapsed, framed by blackened beams. The smell of ash still clung to the wood. Sarah's last line echoed in her mind. Daddy said fire cleans what the law won't. Evelyn's breath misted. She pulled her scarf up and switched on her lantern. "Stay here," she whispered to Ranger. "If I'm not back in an hour—" She stopped, realizing how absurd that sounded. The dog whined softly, then she ducked inside. The tunnel was narrow and steep, the walls streaked with soot. Every sound, her boots, her breath, came back doubled. She found remnants of old rail tracks for mine carts, long warped by heat. The air smelled of rust and something else. Smoke, faint but enduring. After a few hundred feet, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber. The lantern light revealed blackened timbers, melted glass bottles, bones scattered like broken branches. Evelyn knelt beside one. The shape of a jaw, teeth still intact. "God," she whispered. Something glinted near a collapsed support beam, a metal box, half buried. She pried it free. Inside, wrapped in scorched cloth, was a ledger. The pages were fused at the edges, but she could still make out columns of handwriting, dates, quantities of timber, initials. At the bottom of one page, half-burned but legible, authorization T.W. and M.B. Thomas Whitaker. Martha Brooks. Evelyn felt the air leave her lungs. Danny's grandmother had been involved. She turned the next page and froze. Pinned between two sheets was a rusted brass plate that read, "Thomas Whitaker, Foreman." Her pulse thundered. She looked around. The lantern cast long, shivering shadows. For the first time, she realized how deep she was, and how silent the mountain had become. Then she heard it. A slow, deliberate breath behind her. Evelyn spun, lantern raised. The sun slipped behind the Blue Ridge peaks as Evelyn stood beside the rebuilt church, Ranger resting quietly at her feet. The once abandoned village now whispered with life, flowers blooming along broken paths, birds nesting in window frames, and the faint hum of wind through repaired roofs. What had once been a place of silence and sorrow now carried the sound of peace. She glanced toward the spot where Ranger had first dug, the earth now marked by a single wooden cross she had carved herself. Beneath it rested the small box, the locket, the shoe, and the letters, all returned to the soil where they belonged. "You're home now," she whispered, her voice trembling. As twilight deepened, the old church bell chimed once, softly, as if answering her. Evelyn looked to the horizon, tears glistening in the fading light. Ranger nudged her hand gently, grounding her in the present. For the first time in years, she felt something she thought she had lost. Belonging. Briar Hollow was no longer just her refuge. It was a living memory, a place where the past found rest and the living learned to begin again. The mountains at last exhaled their ghosts. The first frost of autumn kissed the valley when Evelyn Carter stood at the edge of the village she had rebuilt from ashes. Mist wound like pale ribbons through the pines, and the rising sun set the dew-covered roofs glowing amber. From the steps of the old church, now restored with new planks and a modest bell, Evelyn looked down at Briar Hollow, a place that had once been abandoned to ghosts. Now breathing again, the mountains were quiet but no longer empty. Birds nested in the eaves. The wind carried the soft scent of wood smoke from the repaired cabins. The earth that had once swallowed tragedy had begun to give back life. Ranger lay at her feet, his coat shining in the golden light. He was older now, his muzzle graying, his movements slower, but his eyes never left her. Every dawn, he seemed to sense her moods before she spoke, as though understanding the unspoken weight she carried. She touched the old locket hanging from her neck, the one Ranger had dug up beneath the churchyard months ago. Inside, the photograph of little Sarah Whitaker and her father remained preserved behind cracked glass. It was no longer a relic of sorrow, but a reminder of everything Evelyn had learned, that even broken things could hold love. After the night, the truth was revealed. The fire, the greed, the betrayal, Evelyn had stayed. Sheriff Cole's investigation had confirmed what Sarah's diary hinted. The fire wasn't an accident. It had been sparked by desperation, a last attempt by Thomas Whitaker to cover up illegal logging that had gone terribly wrong. And the Watcher, the shadowed figure who haunted Evelyn's nights, had turned out to be a man named Caleb Whitaker, Thomas's grandson. He had lived alone in those mountains for decades, guarding the truth, consumed by guilt. Caleb was gone now, taken into custody but still silent about his role. The mountain had finally spoken, but the echoes were bittersweet. Evelyn had been offered a chance to leave. Cole told her she'd done enough, that no one would blame her for walking away. But she refused. For the first time since the fire that had taken her husband and unborn child, she felt rooted somewhere. The pain no longer chained her. It shaped her. So she stayed. She rebuilt the cabins. She cleared the trails. She wrote letters to the families of those who once lived here, inviting them to visit the memorial she'd built in the clearing behind the church, a garden of wildflowers surrounding a simple wooden plaque for those lost to flame and silence. May the mountain remember their names. Evelyn often sat by the garden at dusk, reading Sarah's diary again. She had nearly memorized every page, the wonder in the child's handwriting, the fear, the courage. Sarah's final entry was the one Evelyn read the most. If anyone finds this, please don't forget us. Tell the mountain we didn't mean for it to burn. Each time Evelyn read those words, she whispered back, I won't. The grief that had once drowned her now felt lighter. It hadn't disappeared, it had transformed. Like the forest that grew back after fire, her heart had learned to breathe again. That evening, as the sun sank behind the ridge, Evelyn and Ranger walked down to the creek. The sound of rushing water filled the air. Ranger waded in, pawing at the surface like a pup again. Evelyn smiled, tossing a small stick into the current. Go on, she murmured. Fetch it, old boy, Ranger barked once, a hoarse, joyful sound, and bounded after it. For a fleeting moment, the years fell away. She saw not just her dog, but everything he had carried her through, the nights she thought she couldn't survive, the silence of grief, the terror in the woods. He had been her constant when even hope felt lost. When Ranger returned, stick in mouth, Evelyn knelt and wrapped her arms around his neck. You saved me, she whispered into his fur. You really did. Later she returned to the churchyard. Beneath the large oak stood a simple wooden cross. The ground below it was freshly turned, where she had reburied the locket, Sarah's shoe, and the letters from the villagers she'd found over the months. Around it, she'd planted lavender and bluebells. The air smelled sweet, peaceful. As the wind rustled through the trees, the bell in the church tower swayed faintly, letting out a soft, solitary chime. Evelyn froze. She hadn't touched the rope. It rang once more, clearer this time, echoing through the valley. The sound was not frightening. It was gentle, almost like a farewell. She closed her eyes, tears stinging. Goodbye, Sarah, she whispered. Rest easy. Ranger leaned against her leg, tail thumping softly in the leaves. Weeks passed. Winter came again. Snow blanketed the roofs, glistening in the morning light. Evelyn spent her days writing, turning Sarah's diary and her own journals into a book, The Fire in Briar Hollow. She didn't write for fame, only to preserve the truth. In one chapter, she described the moment Ranger found the grave. The stillness, the shock, the heartbreak. But in the final chapter, she wrote something different, something new. The mountain was never cursed, she wrote. It was only waiting to be heard. And once it was, it gave back everything it had taken, life, memory, and peace. When she finished typing the last line, snow fell outside the window. Ranger slept by the fire, the flickering light dancing across his grey fur. Evelyn reached down to scratch his ear. Come on, boy, she said softly. Let's go ring the bell. That night the sound of the church bell drifted down the valley once more. Its tone was deep and steady, carried by the wind. In Pine Hollow, miles away, old Martha Brooks, Danny's grandmother, heard it faintly through her window. Though her memory was fading, she smiled in her sleep. The mountain, it seemed, was finally forgiving itself. Spring returned. The garden behind the church burst with color again. Travelers occasionally wandered through the pass and found the village no longer abandoned, but quietly alive. A few stayed to help Evelyn rebuild. Children laughed near the creek. Birds nested in rafters that had once been blackened by soot. Evelyn walked through it all with calm purpose, her steps light. She was no longer just a woman who had fled the world. She was its caretaker now. As she stood by the garden one morning, Ranger by her side, she whispered, "We did it." The dog looked up at her, eyes warm and clear. She smiled. "You ready to rest, old boy?" Ranger wagged his tail once, then laid down beside her boots, watching the sun rise over Briar Hollow. When the bell rang again that evening, Evelyn knew it was the mountain's voice, no longer mourning but singing. The ghosts had finally gone quiet. The fire was out, and for the first time since the day she'd arrived, Evelyn Carter didn't feel alone. Briar Hollow was home. The morning mist drifted low across the valley, curling between the skeletons of pine trees and the newly rebuilt cabins of Briar Hollow. Evelyn Carter stood on the ridge overlooking her land, the land that had once been a graveyard of ash and silence. Now faint smoke rose from chimneys. Life had returned. It had been a full year since she'd uncovered the truth buried beneath the old church. The child's bones, the diary, the secret that had set this mountain aflame decades ago. She remembered every detail as if it were yesterday. Ranger's frantic barking, the metallic scent of wet earth, the glint of the locket in the morning frost. What began as a search for peace had become a confrontation with ghosts, her own and the mountains. She breathed in the cold air, eyes following the winding trail that led down to the creek. The forest seemed to watch her now, not as an intruder, but as a keeper. She had learned the rhythm of this place. When the hawk circled, when the storms came, when the first snow whispered against the roof. The land, once cursed by memory, had accepted her. Down by the garden, Ranger trotted ahead, his steps slower these days. His coat shimmered gold in the sunlight, his breath visible in the chill. Evelyn smiled as he stopped to sniff the rows of bluebells she had planted, the same flowers that had once covered the graves she restored. A wooden plaque stood in the center of the garden, carved by Evelyn's own hands, for those lost to flame and silence, and those who found their way back. Beneath it lay the locket, Sarah Whitaker's small shoe, and the bundle of letters Evelyn had uncovered in the charred ruins. The soil here felt sacred, a resting place not just for the dead, but for the pain that had chained them. Evelyn knelt beside Ranger, running her fingers through his fur. "We did it, didn't we, boy?" she whispered. Ranger pressed against her side, his old eyes soft as if he understood. Later that afternoon, Evelyn received visitors. Sheriff Henry Cole arrived first, his old truck rattling down the dirt path. He stepped out with a smile, his gray hair glinting beneath his hat. "Figured I'd find you out here, Carter," he said, walking toward her with a paper bag in hand. "Brought you some coffee from town, and a letter." Evelyn accepted both, grateful for his company. "You didn't have to make the trip," she said. Cole shrugged. "I wouldn't miss a chance to check on the mountain woman who made the papers again." He chuckled, pulling out the folded local newspaper. On the front page, Briar Hollow restored from ghost town to memorial. Evelyn blushed faintly. "I didn't ask for attention. No one who deserves it ever does," Cole replied. She smiled, then opened the letter he handed her. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. Martha Brooks. "Dear Evelyn, the bell rang again last night. I thought I was dreaming, but Danny swore he heard it too. I remembered Sarah's laughter, like the mountain was young again. You've done what the rest of us couldn't. You made peace here. If I don't make it through winter, know this: the mountain is proud of you. With love." Martha. Evelyn folded the letter carefully, pressing it to her heart. "How's Martha?" "Slipping," Cole admitted quietly. "But she's at peace. Talks about her village like it's still here." Evelyn smiled through her tears. It is. After Cole left, evening fell. The air turned cool, the kind of cold that carried memory. Evelyn lit a lantern and walked to the church. The small building gleamed in the moonlight, its white paint fresh, its bell hanging proudly above the door. Inside, candles flickered along the windowsills. She had restored it plank by plank, the roof replaced, the pews scrubbed, the altar rebuilt from salvaged oak. It wasn't just a church anymore. It was a place of remembrance. She sat in the front pew, the light warm on her face. Ranger settled beside her, resting his head on her boots. She reached for the locket again, the metal cool against her skin. "Sarah," she whispered, her voice barely audible in the stillness. "I kept my promise." For a moment, she thought she heard the faint sound of a child's laugh, high, pure, fleeting, like wind through the rafters. She closed her eyes, letting it fill her. Weeks passed. Winter deepened. Snow blanketed the hollow, soft and heavy, muting every sound. Evelyn kept busy, chopping firewood, writing, tending to Ranger. But she felt the years in her bones now, the quiet ache of time. Ranger, too, had grown tired. Some mornings he struggled to rise. She carried him to the porch when the snow was too deep. One morning, as dawn colored the sky in pale rose, Evelyn found him lying near the bell tower, facing the mountain. His eyes were open, peaceful. His breath was still, her heart cracked. She knelt beside him, holding his head in her lap. "You waited until the sun came up," she whispered, her tears falling onto his fur. "You brave, beautiful boy." For hours she stayed there, stroking his fur, humming softly through her tears. When the light grew brighter, she lifted him gently and carried him to the garden. Beneath the bluebells, she dug into the frozen soil until her hands bled. When the grave was ready, she placed him inside, wrapping him in the blanket from their cabin. Beside him, she placed the stick he'd fetched from the creek the first summer they arrived. "Rest now, Ranger," she said through trembling lips. "You've done enough." The bell tolled once in the distance, a single, solemn note. Evelyn looked up. "Goodbye, my friend." Spring came late that year. When it did, the garden exploded with color. Lavender, daisies, and bluebells blooming in wild, brilliant patches. Evelyn planted a new marker by Ranger's grave. Ranger, guardian of the hollow. Visitors began to come more often. Hikers, journalists, families of those lost in the old fire. They left flowers, trinkets, sometimes just stood in silence. The village no longer felt haunted. It felt holy. Evelyn became its caretaker, its storyteller. She guided each visitor through the ruins, explaining what once was, the mill, the houses, the people who had lived and laughed here. Every time she told Sarah's story, she felt the child's spirit lingering in the breeze. One afternoon, a young girl approached her, holding a small notebook. "Miss Evelyn," she said shyly, "is it true your dog found the secret?" Evelyn smiled, kneeling to meet her eyes. "He found more than that," she said. "He found the truth." The girl thought for a moment. "Do you think the mountain's happy now?" Evelyn looked toward the peaks, sunlight rippling over snowmelt. "Yes," she said softly. "I think it finally is." That night she sat on her porch, the stars spilling across the sky. The bell rang once, not from wind, but from something deeper, older, alive. Evelyn smiled, closing her eyes. Her life had come full circle, from the fire that took her family to the mountain that gave her a new one. Grief had once defined her, but here, among ashes and ghosts, she'd found peace. She lifted her face to the wind. "Thank you," she whispered, to the mountain, to Sarah, to Ranger, to everything that had burned and still dared to bloom again. The wind shifted through the trees, carrying the faint scent of pine and lavender. For a heartbeat, she swore she heard Ranger's bark echo from the valley below. Not mournful, but joyous. She smiled through her tears. "I hear you, boy." Months later, Evelyn's book was published. The Fire in Briar Hollow became a quiet success, praised for its honesty and heart. People called it a story of ghosts, but she knew better. It was a story of survival, of forgiveness. Letters poured in from readers around the country, some who had lost loved ones, others who simply needed to believe that places could heal. Evelyn replied to each one, signing every letter the same way. The past never dies. It just waits to be understood. Evelyn Carter, Briar Hollow. Years passed. The seasons cycled endlessly. Evelyn grew older, her steps slower, her hair silver like the frost that blanketed the hollow each December. But she never left. When her time finally came, she was found sitting in her rocking chair on the porch, a book open in her lap, her face calm, as if listening to the wind. The bell tolled once that morning, clear and pure across the valley. Beside her chair lay the same locket Ranger had found so many years ago, polished bright by age and touch. Inside were two pictures now, Sarah Whitaker and her father on one side, and on the other, a photo of Evelyn and Ranger, taken the year they rebuilt the village. The circle was complete. Today, hikers still find Briar Hollow tucked deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains, a village of quiet cabins, flower gardens, and a white church whose bell sometimes rings on still evenings. Locals say it's just the wind, but those who linger long enough swear they see a woman's silhouette on the ridge, a figure with a loyal dog beside her, watching over the hollow as the mist rolls in. They say she smiles, turns toward the sound of the bell, and vanishes with the dawn. The mountain, once burdened by fire and grief, breathes easy now. Briar Hollow is no longer forgotten, and in every echo of that lonely bell, the world remembers. Love, once buried, always finds its way home.